A single tear glides down a child's cheek. There's no wail, no visible sorrow, just silence, and the slow shimmer of saltwater tracing skin. It appears uninvited, unexplained, and yet it holds a kind of gravity. What if this tear isn't just water and salt but time? We think of tears as fleeting, vanishing moments that come and go without permanence. But in truth, each tear is the endpoint of an ancient journey, not just biologically, but cosmically. Born from the body, yes, but also from memory, from story, from evolution. A tear, in its quiet descent, carries within it the chemistry of empathy, the biology of attachment, and perhaps even the memory of a million ancestors who learned that survival wasn't just about strength, but about feeling what makes us cry. More precisely, why are we the only animals on Earth known to shed emotional tears? Not in response to dust or onions, but to grief, longing, love, or awe. Behind that tiny drop is a mystery stretching back through the deep time of our species. It's not just about ducts and glands, it's about what it means to be human. Scientists have dissected tears under microscopes, breaking them down into proteins, lipids, and electrolytes. But no element on the periodic table can explain the aching release we feel when we finally let go. No chart can quantify the meaning of crying when words fail. Tears emerge when language breaks, and what's left is something more primal, more embodied, more ancient. So where does a tear come from? Not just anatomically, but emotionally, historically, even cosmically. Is a tear a leftover signal from early humans who needed to show submission without sound? Or is it a deeper message of it, that biology can hold emotion, that molecules can memorize experience? In this story, we follow the path of a single tear, not just down the cheek of a child, but down the spiral staircase of time, through evolution, through chemistry, through memory, through grief, until we arrive not just at an answer, but a feeling. A tear is not just a drop of water, it's a messenger. To understand its significance, we first have to examine the science behind it. There are three main types of tears our eyes produce: basal tears, reflex tears, and emotional tears. Basal tears are always present, forming a protective film across the cornea that keeps the eye nourished and smooth. Reflex tears appear suddenly, released in defense against dust, smoke, or a sliced onion. But it's emotional tears that capture our deepest interest. These are the ones that rise unbidden when grief overwhelms us, when joy surprises us, or when the heart can't hold its contents anymore. And they're not just salt water. Emotional tears carry within them a potent mix of hormones, enkephalin, a natural painkiller, as well as CTH and other stress hormones. In other words, when we cry, our body is literally trying to soothe us from the inside out. But there's something even more profound happening. Emotional tears are communicative. Without a single word, they can elicit care, soften anger, or forge connection. A tear sliding down someone's face can quiet a room. It draws attention not to drama, but to something real, something raw. Neuroscience has shown that witnessing someone cry activates regions in our brain related to empathy and social bonding. Evolution has sculpted us not only to feel but to see feeling in others and respond. It's a kind of silent language, written in fluid, that transcends words entirely. To trace this capacity back through evolution is to wander through deep time. Reptiles and birds produce tears too. They're necessary to keep eyes moist, but no creature, as far as we know, weeps from emotion like we do. Emotional crying is uniquely human. Somewhere in our evolutionary lineage, tear ducts and facial muscles became not just tools of survival, but instruments of expression. Anthropologists believe this shift may have emerged with the rise of early mammals, creatures that lived in tight-knit social groups, where communication was critical to survival. Crying may have evolved as a non-verbal way to elicit care, especially in infants who could not yet speak. A baby's cry, paired with tears, might have triggered caregiving in a parent's brain, an evolutionary advantage in the fragile world of early human life. As we evolved more complex social bonds, perhaps emotional tears became part of our social toolkit, an outward signal of inner pain, meant not just for ourselves but for the eyes of others. Tears, then, may be one of our earliest and most powerful social technologies. In our modern world, the significance of tears has only deepened. We see them in grief therapy, where letting go through crying can be a profound step toward healing. Therapists often speak of the moment a client finally weeps, not as breakdown, but breakthrough. In that release, there is often clarity, acceptance, or simply the beginning of emotional processing. Across cultures, tears mark moments of profound change: funerals, births, weddings, even protests. In religion, tears have long been seen as sacred signs of divine presence or spiritual surrender. And in art, the image of a single tear has become one of the most potent symbols of human vulnerability and resilience. But our relationship with crying is also fraught. In many cultures, especially among men, tears are policed, suppressed, shamed. We teach children to toughen up, to hide their tears, to associate crying with weakness. Yet the act of crying is not a weakness at all. It's a complex physiological and emotional event rooted in strength, depth, and connection. What gets lost in suppression is not just emotion, but communication. The silent bridge between one nervous system and another. Think of a funeral. The air is still, words fail, and yet tears fall, often shared by people who don't know each other, united not by familiarity but by shared loss. Why is this moment so deeply human? Because in it, we are reminded that behind the social roles, languages, and differences, our bodies respond to pain in the same ancient way. We cry, and in that shared act of weeping, we see each other not as strangers, but as humans who feel, humans who remember, humans who, even in silence, long to be understood. In the early 1980s, a quietly radical study began to change how scientists understood tears. Led by biochemist Dr. William Frey, researchers set out to compare two kinds of tears: those triggered by cutting onions and those shed during emotional distress. At first glance, they looked the same: clear, saline, inconspicuous. But under the microscope, they told two very different stories. Reflex tears, it turned out, were mostly salt and water. Emotional tears, however, contained something more: higher concentrations of stress hormones like ACTH and prolactin, along with leucine and kephalin, a natural painkiller. In other words, tears don't just express emotion, they excrete it. The body appears to be purging chemicals linked to psychological stress. This single finding cracked open an ancient question. Are we crying out our pain, not just metaphorically, but biochemically? This led to a strange and beautiful dilemma. If emotional tears carry stress hormones, are they a kind of internal medicine, a self-regulating act of healing? For centuries, poets and mystics spoke of weeping as catharsis. Now, science was beginning to echo that idea, not in metaphor, but in molecules. The implications were startling. Could crying actually alter our physiological state? Could it help the body return to balance after trauma? And if so, what happens when we can't cry? Tears, once dismissed as signs of fragility, began to look more like a biological adaptation, perhaps even an evolutionary advantage. They blur the line between the psychological and the physical. To weep is to signal vulnerability, yes, but also to chemically process it, to offload stress, one drop at a time. This leads us to a second, equally fascinating question. Can tears diagnose more than emotion? Tear fluid, like blood or saliva, contains a trove of biological information. Recent studies have identified potential biomarkers for diseases like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and even certain cancers right in our tears. With just a microliter of fluid, scientists are beginning to explore how tear diagnostics could become a non-invasive window into the nervous system, immune function, and stress response. What once dripped quietly onto our cheeks may one day help us understand the earliest signs of disease. But what if the tears never come? In conditions like alexithymia, the inability to identify or express emotions crying may be nearly impossible. The same is true for many trauma survivors, whose nervous systems have adapted to protect them by dulling emotional expression. For them, the absence of tears isn't relief, it's repression. And over time, unexpressed emotion doesn't vanish. It calcifies, manifesting as chronic stress, anxiety, or even physical illness. Crying, it turns out, isn't just a release. Without it, the body may carry burdens it was never meant to bear alone. There's a moral tension here, too. In many cultures, especially in the West, crying has long been associated with weakness, particularly in men. The stiff upper lip, the command to man up, the cultural shame around visible emotion. All of these work to suppress one of our most biologically intelligent responses to suffering. But if crying truly heals, if it clears toxins, triggers empathy, and communicates vulnerability in a way nothing else can, then maybe we've misunderstood it entirely. Perhaps tears are not a sign of breakdown, but of resilience, a secret strength we've misread for centuries. And in denying ourselves the right to weep, we may be denying ourselves the full spectrum of what it means to be human. Throughout history, humans have both revered and reviled their own tears. In ancient Egypt, mourners were said to collect their tears in small alabaster vessels, so-called tear bottles, and place them in tombs as offerings to the dead. The tear was not simply a symbol of sadness, but of devotion, loyalty, and the gravity of loss. In ancient Greece, philosophers couldn't agree on the meaning of weeping. Plato dismissed tears as undignified, a failure of reason. But Aristotle saw value in them, writing that emotional catharsis through tears was essential to human flourishing. Across cultures, from Mesopotamian laments to biblical psalms, tears were not just reactions, they were rituals. During the Victorian era, the sentimentality of mourning reached ornate heights. Tear catchers, delicate glass vials with stoppers, were given to widows to prove their sorrow. Some even believed the evaporation of the last tear in the bottle would mark the end of grief. In every age, tears have occupied a space between the sacred and the shameful. But as science rose to prominence, especially during the Enlightenment, an early industrial era, emotion was often viewed with suspicion. Crying, particularly in women, was pathological. In the early 1900s, the emerging field of psychology frequently treated tears as a symptom of hysteria, a disorder of weak nerves and irrational minds. For men, the script was harsher. Tears were seen as a moral failure, an affront to masculinity. Soldiers during World War I and II were shamed or punished for crying. The image of the stoic, tearless man became an ideal, reinforced by culture, military training, and even medicine. But this cultural suppression came with a cost. Research now shows that men who internalize emotional restraint are more likely to experience higher levels of chronic stress, hypertension, heart disease, and untreated depression. The refusal to cry didn't make anyone stronger, it just made their pain quieter and longer lasting. Modern neuroscience is rewriting this story. Using tools like fMRI, scientists can now observe what happens in the brain during episodes of weeping. Crying, it turns out, doesn't just activate pain centers, it lights up the brain's reward circuitry. That sense of relief we sometimes feel after crying isn't imagined. It's neurological. Crying helps regulate emotion, lowers stress, hormone levels, and fosters social bonding. In fact, in many social mammals, particularly humans, tears act as powerful social cues. Seeing someone cry triggers empathic responses in others, often leading to comfort, touch, and proximity. It's a built-in mechanism for connection. But in the 21st century, a new tension is emerging between emotional expression and technological interpretation. Today, artificial intelligence is being trained to recognize human tears. Through facial recognition, infrared imaging, and machine learning, AI systems can now identify when someone is crying and adjust their responses accordingly. Robotic caregivers, customer service bots, and even AI companions are being designed to detect distress. But while machines may see tears, they cannot feel them. They do not cry. They cannot process pain, remember love, or long for connection. They can only simulate understanding. This raises unsettling questions. What happens to empathy in a world increasingly mediated by technology? If tears are met with programmed sympathy rather than human presence, do they lose their depth? Will we begin to perform emotion for machines or worse? Stop showing emotion altogether, because the eyes watching us can't truly understand what it means to suffer or to love. In a society where emotional labor is increasingly outsourced to algorithms, the act of crying becomes radical again. Not because it is weak, but because it is irreducibly human. Tears cannot be downloaded. They cannot be replicated by lines of code. They are the trembling voice of the body, saying, I am here, I feel this. Witness me, and in a digital age where real connection is endangered, perhaps that is what makes them sacred. The deeper we follow the trail of a tear, the clearer the paradox becomes. Crying did not evolve for sadness, evolved for survival. It's a twist that turns our assumptions upside down. We often think of tears as signs that something is broken, that a person is overwhelmed, defeated, or emotionally lost. But in truth, tears are a sophisticated biological system designed not to express despair, but to signal need, restore equilibrium, and invite connection. Long before humans had language, before we painted caves or carved tools, we had tears. The cry of a baby, wet-eyed and wailing, is not about sorrow, it's a biological SOS, a call that reaches deep into a parent's nervous system, compelling them to act. And in adults, emotional tears may still serve that same ancient function. When we cry, we are signaling not just to ourselves, but to others that we have reached the edge of what we can carry alone. This changes everything, because what looks like weakness may actually be the beginning of healing. What feels like breaking down may be the first step in letting go. Emotional tears, those mysterious drops, rich with stress hormones and endorphins, are not simply the residue of suffering, they are its remedy. They are how the nervous system offloads burden, how the body communicates in a language older than speech. A tear can dissolve a wall between people. It can puncture silence. It can remind us that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength, but its precondition. Seen through the lens of deep time, tears take on an even greater significance. Imagine the first hominid who wept not in pain, but in grief, perhaps mourning the death of a companion. That tear may have marked a moment when survival transcended instinct, when emotion became memory, and memory became meaning. From Neanderthals, burying their dead, to modern parents, shedding tears at a child's first steps, the arc of emotional crying stretches across hundreds of thousands of years. Every tear we shed today carries within it the biology of mammals who learned to care, the chemistry of connection, and the invisible architecture of our evolution. In that light, a tear is not simply water and salt. It is a time capsule. It holds within it the pulse of a moment, the ache, the release, the turning point. It carries echoes of every ancestor who cried before us, the mother who wept over a lost child in the Paleolithic night, the father who held back tears as he taught his son to hunt, The lovers who cried when they were parted by war. The elders who wept when they knew their time was ending. One tear may last only seconds as it falls, but its lineage stretches back 200 million years. Through mammals, through bonds, through survival. So perhaps we've misunderstood crying, not because it is small but because it is vast. A tear isn't the end of control. It's the signal that our body has chosen to keep going, to release what it no longer needs to hold. And in a world that teaches us to suppress, to filter, to smile through everything, the act of weeping becomes revolutionary, not a breakdown, not a failure, but the oldest, most honest thing we know how to do today. Modern science is not only validating what ancient cultures intuited, it's expanding our understanding of tears into new and unexpected territory. Recent studies show that people who cry during periods of acute stress tend to recover faster than those who hold everything in. This isn't just a psychological effect, it's physiological. After a good cry, levels of oxytocin and endorphins rise in the bloodstream. These are the same chemicals associated with bonding, relief, and emotional warmth. Crying, in other words, doesn't just express pain, it transforms it. It's a biological pivot point between distress and recovery, an embodied act of emotional regulation. More surprisingly, crying is now being linked to vagal tone, the health and responsiveness of the vagus nerve, which governs the parasympathetic nervous system. People with higher vagal tone tend to be more emotionally resilient, capable of calming themselves after stress, and tears may be part of that reflex. They are not just a symptom of overload, but a signal that the nervous system is attempting to reset, to rebalance, to let go. We are beginning to see that crying is not a collapse, but a form of neurological self-care at the same time. Medical science is turning its attention to the tear itself, not as a metaphor, but as a diagnostic goldmine. Researchers are developing cutting-edge tests using tear fluid to detect early signs of neurological diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, as well as metabolic disorders like diabetes. Because tears are easy to collect, minimally invasive, and rich in biological markers, they offer a promising new frontier in personalized medicine. Each drop contains a molecular fingerprint, proteins, lipids, enzymes that can offer clues about the health of the brain, the immune system, and even cellular aging. What once fell to the floor unnoticed may soon help doctors catch disease before symptoms ever appear. Psychology, too, is undergoing a quiet revolution in its view of tears. Trauma-informed therapists now understand that crying in session isn't something to fix, it's something to honor. Emotional release, when it happens in a safe and supportive environment, can accelerate healing, especially when that crying is witnessed. Neuroscience confirms what poets have long said: we regulate best, not in isolation, but in connection. Crying with others during grief rituals, therapy, or even quiet shared moments activates co-regulation, the process by which two nervous systems stabilize each other. Tears, in this context, become not just a personal catharsis, but a social bridge, a non-verbal way for the body to say, I can't hold this alone. I don't want to hold it alone. This is perhaps the deepest insight we have into crying, that it exists at the boundary between internal emotion and external connection. A tear starts within, born of memory, sensation, stress, or longing. But the moment it leaves the eye, it becomes an offering, an outward sign of an inward state. It invites others in. It asks for presence, for empathy, for response. And in doing so, it collapses the distance between bodies, between minds, between hearts. Tears are not an inconvenience. They are not a sign of weakness. They are the body's most intimate language of truth, a biological strategy for resilience, neurological process of restoration, a silent act of connection that says, Asterisk, I feel. I'm overwhelmed, but I am not alone. Asterisk, and in that moment, something ancient and tender happens, something that has helped our species survive and love for millennia. A nurse leans over gently, her gloved hand soft against the thin, weathered skin of an old man's cheek. She wipes away a single tear. He is not in pain. His eyes are open, but he does not speak. He is remembering. His hand, frail but still warm, tightens slightly around hers. That quiet gesture is everything. No words are the language of presence. In the sterile calm of the hospital room, something deeply human unfolds, unspoken yet undeniable. A tear falls, and in its descent, a life is honored, because a single tear is never just fluid. It is not merely the surface tension of water and salt. It is the residue of memory, the culmination of feeling, the shimmer of something larger moving through the smallest of vessels. It is the echo of a long biological history, an inheritance from our ancestors who survived not just through strength or intellect, but through their capacity to feel and to be felt. A tear is the body's way of saying, something here mattered. In that moment, biology and philosophy meet. The body releases, but the soul reveals. This is the quiet power of tears. They make the invisible visible. They carry the weight of things that cannot be spoken, the gravity of emotions too dense for language. They are the proof that what we carry inside has shape, and that others can hold it with us. We cry at endings and beginnings, in grief and in joy, in pain and in awe. We cry when we've lost something, and when we've finally found it again. And always, tears mark a threshold, a turning point where the body says, asterisk, this matters. Witness this, asterisk, perhaps that is their deepest purpose, to remind us that we are not alone in our experience, that the world sees us, even in our most vulnerable moments, that we can be known, even without words. So maybe crying is not a weakness to overcome or a symptom to hide, but one of our last remaining forms of pure human truth, an act of surrender, a call for connection, a signal from the depths that we are still capable of feeling deeply in a world that so often asks us to numb. And maybe that is what will save us, even now. Across time and cultures, from the first Neanderthal tear shed beside a fallen loved one, to a parent's silent weeping at the birth of a child, to this quiet moment in a hospital room where memory stirs and touch answers, we are reminded, to cry is to be human, to cry is to connect. And in the tear's descent, we find something rising, something wordless, something sacred. A single tear falls, and the world listens.